Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's virtual open day for RSM's Global Executive MBA program. My name is Brandon Kirby, and I am the Director of Marketing, Sales, and Admissions here at RSM for our MBA programs as well as our Executive Education Open programs. And it is my pleasure to welcome you here this afternoon or this evening or this morning, depending on where you're dialing in from around the world, to learn more about our Global Executive MBA program. Today, we're joined by the academic director, by the dean of the school, by faculty members, by alums of former programs, as well as the programs office. We have a packed agenda for everyone, a lot of things that we're going to cover, and we're really excited to have you all. So just to give you a brief rundown of what you can expect this afternoon, we're going to start with some opening remarks about the program in general from Professor Hans van Oosterhout, who's also the academic director of the program. He's been one of the major forces behind the development of the program, and he'll tell you a little bit more about that. And then we're going to bring in one of the faculty who's actually teaching in the program, and that's going to be Associate Professor Yanis Thrakos, who teaches our Managerial Decision Analysis course within the program. And I had a chance to see the presentation ahead of today. Super interesting. I can't wait for him to present it. After that, we'll invite the Dean of Executive Education here at RSM, Professor Nicola Klein. She'll come in and speak about global experiential learning, which is part of the program, as well as what does it mean to be global. So she's going to talk a little bit about that. We'll come back to Hans afterwards to introduce strategic leadership development, to share some thoughts on that. We did have kind of a late retraction from the presentation. We had someone who was caught in the nasty storm down in Cologne and was unable to be able to dial in, and that was Professor Hannes Leroy. So Hans is going to step in his place and provide some input on that. We'll also come in with an alumni panel with two people who graduated from our One MBA program, which was our other senior executive program, to talk about their experience with RSM and what that looked like. We will also have a quick welcome from the programs office. This is the team that would be taking care of you during your time in the program. And we will go from there. So with that, just some housekeeping. If you do have some questions or comments, please feel free to put them in the Q&A box. If you have comments during any of the presentations, feel free to put them in the comment box. We have people from the admissions team who are there to also answer questions. We might bring in some of those questions during the program this afternoon. And of course, if you do have questions for the alums when we get to that part of the program, please feel free to share. With that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And Hans, how are you doing today? It's always good to see you. How's your day so far today?
Thank you, Brandon. My name is Hans van Oosterhout. I'm indeed a professor of corporate governance, and I've been with RSM for a long time. My day is quite good. I'm going on vacation on Friday. Friday, 6 p.m. is when I check out. So I'm really looking forward to that after a year of sitting behind my screen. Sure. I hope to see some fresh air.
Absolutely.
So yeah, when talking about the program, I'm the academic director. So that means that together with the team at RSM, we have designed a new program based on the old program, the One MBA, which was a consortium program between 5 universities. We decided to discontinue that program for various reasons. One of the most important reasons were the tremendous disruptions that we faced with the COVID crisis, and we weren't able to travel to the extent that we would have loved to. So we decided to start a new program and to also do it by ourselves, maybe in the future, work with partners again, but not at this stage, because we wanted to have control over what we want to do and design it from scratch. There's a lot of things that haven't changed simply because they were good to go. And we have a lot of experience in that. And there's other things that we did change. One of the things we changed more explicitly is the focus group, the target audience, if you will, for this program. We already had a very senior group in the One MBA program at relatively high level of the organizations that they work for. And we decided to cash out on that and to really make sure that we focus on that group, and potentially also people from other groups that are at similar levels. And that meant that we not just say we want a more senior crowd in the group, but also that we focus on strategic leadership development. You might ask yourself, what does it mean? Strategic leadership. Strategic leadership is actually when you actually move through the functional responsibilities as a leader to more generic responsibility on behalf of the business as a whole, right? And you might transition, or at least aspire to transition, to a general management function at the C-suite level. And that is really what we took to be the kind of program that we wanted to offer for people that have that aspiration and that potential, and that they also need to know everything that a strategic leader would need to know to function at a boardroom level, C-suite level. And that means that you have to know a lot about, or you have to know sufficient about a number of things that normally strategic leaders might not have yet, and that we have to do that, and also build on the most recent challenges. So when we decided to launch and design the new program, we first set ourselves the goal that we would be relatively selective, or quite selective in admissions to the program. More than half of what you learn during the program, you learn from your students, your fellow students in class. And we want to make sure that it really matters who sits next to you in class, and that you really engage in this, this peer learning experience in the way that we envisage. We even tried to organize that a bit more intentionally than we did in the past, by making sure that everybody's on the same page, and that sometimes people who have no experience or no knowledge in a specific field take the lead in making team assignments, for example, or case assignments, supported by people who know a lot. And so we hope to be intervening in a more targeted way. So we really hope to target our treatment, if you will, to those who need it most, and others in a more supporting role. And that differs, right? We know that people have various backgrounds, very often functional backgrounds. We had a lot of researchers, PhDs in our program in the past, and a lot of lawyers and people functioning at their highest level in the organization of functional competence, that are now transitioning to more general management function. So that's the first thing. We wanted to be more selective in admitting students to the program. So the core courses that we have designed for this program, are really making sure that everybody's on the same page with respect to the foundations of all the disciplines, the functional areas that you need to function at a C-suite level, or just below a C-suite level. That means, we will discuss these foundations, but not just these foundations, but also the most recent developments in the design of the course. We have chosen exactly those core courses that we think you cannot do without at the C-suite level. Of course, we not teach those courses. Will not teach those courses as if you were a student knowing nothing. We assume that at a certain level you have knowledge, at least to also study yourself, and we will focus the classroom specifically for the whole group on talking about things that matter from a C-suite perspective, right? So when we do accounting or corporate finance, we will first make sure that everybody understands the basics and the foundations, if needed by tutoring individually. But at the same time, we also want to make sure that people that are proficient in finance and accounting and all these other areas have something to do in class, and also contribute also to the learning of others, and have something that they learn themselves by looking at this from a different perspective, the perspective of a strategic leader. Meaning you don't have to be an expert, but you need to be able to converse with experts and ask the right questions, understand everything in the right way in order to make decisions. So that's one area, that's the foundations and the most recent developments in a specific fields like marketing, business analytics, managerial analytics, corporate governance, strategy, and other courses. Then we say, so given these foundational courses, we also need to focus on the things that are hot and happening. The big strategic challenges that managers at C-suite level or just below are facing. And we decided to focus on 3 buckets of different challenges. And these challenges may differ over time, but through all kinds of discussions that we had with companies, with students, alumni from the past, but also with recruitment agencies for senior positions, we identified 3 buckets of challenges. First is about digitalization in how to lead digitalization in your business. Businesses are very different, but there are some commonalities, and you should be able to understand the foundations. And we have these challenges, experiential challenges, these courses as experiential challenges that you will do by immersing yourself, combined with travel, to really know what's going on and to learn how to tackle the problems that C-suite executives are facing now. The second is leading entrepreneurship and venturing. It's not only the case that every business has to reinvent its business every once in a while and venture into new businesses, but it's also that we can learn a lot from startups and scale-ups that we are investigating increasingly also at Erasmus University and Rotterdam School of Management. And there's some really generic management lessons to be learned from these groups. And we will travel to a context in which the ecosystem with respect to startups and scale-ups is very lively, to immerse ourselves in what's going on and to really understand from a first-person perspective what it means. And finally, of course, we all have the corporate types among us, the people that work in relatively large organizations that are composed of different business lines, different businesses, even different companies, kind of portfolio. And these managers need to make strategic challenges at the corporate level, meaning what are we going to divest? What are we not going to do anymore in the future? And what do we want to do in the future, either by acquisition or building something from the ground up? And so these corporate C-suite level challenges are also important. And we'll talk about a lot of them, mergers, acquisitions, growth strategies, but also divestments, reorganizations, and stuff like that. And then finally, it's not just that we have to learn things, learn content. We also want you to develop yourself as a manager, specifically to the strategic leadership level. And that means that now you become or aspire to be a strategic leader on behalf of your organization. You have to be able to make decisions and deal with all kinds of aspects that go with strategic leadership. And therefore, we have designed a strategic leadership development track throughout the program. It's a really large track, a lot of hours will be dedicated to that. I will tell you a bit more about that track, even if I have not prepared because of this person that is actually teaching the track being stuck in Cologne because of the weather. But the gist of the idea is that it's not just about learning new content, but it's also about realizing what you yourself bring to the table, your natural dispositions, the things that you might need to change and practice and develop going forward, becoming a strategic leader. One example that I always use is that people now sometimes have to talk to the press on behalf of their organization, and that very often they are criticized by people who used to work before them that they don't have these one-on-one meetings, that communication is often more one way than it was in the past, and you have to deal with that. And at the same time, you have to let go of certain things. You cannot control everything based on your expertise anymore, even in your own expertise, because you transition in more general responsibilities. You have to let others and empower and enable others to do that kind of work. Now, of course, I'm happy to answer a bit more questions. I can tell you a bit more about the strategic leadership development track that we have because Hannes is not here today. And I'm always around. I will stick around to answer any questions that you may have. But these are the design parameters that were most important in redeveloping the program. Thank you.
Yeah, Hans, thank you for that. And I think we'll have some time later on in the presentation where we can just kind of have a little chat between you and I about strategic leadership development. And I think what's really important with this program is when we went into the design phase, we were speaking with so many different stakeholders to ask, what is it you're looking for your senior leadership to be bringing to the table in today's world? And whether that was speaking with corporates or recruiters, a lot of the people that we have around RSM in our community that are very well placed in different parts of businesses, it really went into the design process. And so we did imagine it sort of from the ground up. There were some absolutes, some building blocks that we wanted to maintain, but we really built out from that. And I think you'll see that both in the courses that we offer, strategic leadership development, for example, even in the experiential learning that we do. Speaking of learning, I think it's a good point to maybe bring Giannis into the conversation. Hello to you, sir. Good to see you. How are you doing today?
Hi, Brian. Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation. I really like the smooth flow of this session here, and I'm really interested to see actually maybe a little bit more interaction from our participants. So I saw that there were a couple of questions. I know that people are keen on learning more about the program, and I'm here to do the best I can from my end to help them take a flavor of how it is to take a course in this new program. So maybe a little bit of introduction. I'm Ioannis, as you can probably see under my name here. I'm originally from Greece, but the last 6 years I reside in Rotterdam, which is a fantastic city. I'm going to show you a bit of Rotterdam in a while. Before that, I spent quite a bit of time in London. I did my studies there. I was at London Business School teaching faculty at LSE. But then after that, I decided that I actually move. I just cross the channel and then I go to Rotterdam, which is an amazing city. And just to give you an idea of what I mean about that, maybe it's a good time to share my screen where you can actually see a nice picture of Rotterdam, right? So this is the center of the city with the Erasmus Bridge and everything. So yes, I'm going to be talking about the course that I have, which is a foundational course. It's one of the first courses that you're actually going to have if you join the program, and it is called Managerial Decision Analysis. So it's all about making decisions. In fact, the very reason why we are here today is because we wanted to help you in order to make the best decision for your career. So since we're making decisions all the time, every single day, why is it that we need a new course just specific on making decisions? And that's a great question. In fact, what happens is that the moment that we live is actually quite interesting. Well, interesting maybe, not in the best possible way, but as the Chinese were saying, I wish you not to live interesting times, for example, meaning that interesting has a flavor of challenges there. So what happens here is that we are undergoing a transformative area. And, several works, several jobs are transformed and different skills are necessary. In fact, one of the major skills that we need is to look back at our decisions and see how is our decision quality here. See, are we making the right decisions? Are we solving the right problems? And this is the overarching goal of this course here. So to look back in our decisions in a more systematic way than we normally do, and try to see, okay, take a critical perspective and see, do we make the right decisions every time that we have to make an important managerial decision? So in management, especially in strategic management, as Hasmon says before, we are solving very complex problems. And in today's world complexity, we need to be very acute when we have to frame those problems. In fact, we have to try to solve the right problem. So this is a skill where whenever you have these surveys about, which is important for future work and for leaderships, for leaders, then it comes up regularly there. So the ability to solve complex problems. In fact, there is one such survey that came up last week from McKinsey when they look at 4 different categories of skills: cognitive, interpersonal, digital, and self-leadership. When we look at the cognitive and interpersonal skills, we see that we have further categorizations here. For example, in cognitive, we have critical thinking, planning and ways of working, communication, and mental flexibility. So I had already designed my course before the survey comes out, but I was very, very happy to see that we cover some core critical skills. So the McKinsey guys call these deltas, and these stand for distinct elements of talent. So in our course, we focus specifically on critical thinking. So we're looking at structured problem solving, logical reasoning, understanding biases that are inherent into decision making, and also our ability, our skill to seek relevant information. Of course, there are a lot of other things that are complementary to critical thinking, which we're going to be raised and we're going to be trained during the course. For example, asking the right questions, or the ability to listen. So these are major skills to which we're going to be exposed within the course. Of course, as Hans said, the entire program is designed from ground up, and therefore we do cover other things like digital transformation, digital leadership in other courses, but also self-leadership, and in particular strategic leadership, as Hans was talking about before. So here there is also an element of courage and risk-taking under entrepreneurship and understanding biases, having self-confidence, which we are going to be looking at, not necessarily in my course, but actually in other courses as well. So what it is about in my course, we're going to be focusing, first of all, on setting the problem right. When we're dealing with complex problems, it is very easy to lead ourselves astray and actually focus on the wrong elements of the problem. So we're going to be doing problem framing exercises so that we take a complex problem and we need to identify exactly what is the objective that we need to know. So often we have multiple stakeholders, we have different people that come from different perspectives, and we have to understand what it is that they bring into the problem. So we're going to go through this exercise, not at theoretical level, but actually looking at case studies and how we make the actual decisions. The other part is we're going to be looking critically at what are the factors that make a good decision. How do we decide that the decision is actually good or bad? Do we have to wait for the outcome? Do we have to wait for the result of the decision? And if we do so, does a good result mean that we have a good decision or not? And in which case is it the one or the other? And decision making is becoming even more complex nowadays because typically what we have as managers is we have people to lead and we have people to manage. But with the advent of digital transformation, a lot of decision making is automated. Right? So of course, we're going to be focusing on traditional stuff like coping with uncertainty and risk, making ourselves a lot more comfortable when we are faced with risks and understand better calculated risks and where we should take them and where we should not take them. But also we should differentiate between human decision-making and robot-driven decision-making. Because in the next decade and so, there's going to be a blending mix of decisions that are taken by AI software, but also humans. And we have to be aware of what are the strengths and weaknesses of every decision mode. So I'm not sure what was the last time that you actually had a course. But I can imagine that at least like if you were around my age, I had a very different experience to what I do now when I was back in my days as a student. So typically back then it was the professor or the teacher lecturing, and then people there were almost passive receivers of a message. This is not the way we're doing things anymore, or actually we have never been doing that at this level, to be honest. So the lecture is more of an event, but there is preparation for this event. There's the actual event that happens, and then there is the post-event stimuli. So even before the lecture, we do upload some interactive content, some material. It could be some videos, it could be some documents in which we ask questions or we encourage the participants to ask discussions, to initiate discussions. So the whole idea here is two objectives. First of all, to give a first flavor of what we're going to cover for the actual lecture and to make some necessary preparation so that we make sure that everybody is up to level to understand, to understand the course better and delve deeper and actually enhance the learning experience. This does mean that we may have to do some technical pre-work. And what we mean by that is typically Excel. So we're going to be using Excel as a decision support tool to, it's like a simulation tool where we can actually go to Excel, we treat it as a lab, as a laboratory. And then we can set up a business scenario there, and then we can tweak it and see how things are going to go, are going to evolve without actually implementing this in practice. But in order to do that, we need to have certain skills, which we cover initially as in pre-work. And then we have the actual lecture. When it comes to the lecture, we actually have two formats. The actual lecture has to do with a lot of discussions, a lot of stories. We're going to be looking at case studies and and also some games sometimes, because it's nice to learn with having fun and playing games. These are different dimensions of learning. And actually, if we cover different dimensions, then we have a more integrated experience. For example, we start with a case study and we share the experience of all the participants, and this enhances the learning of the entire group collectively. And then we do some theory building, but the theory building that we do is actually based on the cases. So we look at what elements can be generalized, what is it that we really learn from that, not specific to the business that we're looking at, but what is the fundamental property and fundamental truths that we learn from each case study. I'm going to be giving you an example here because I do realize that this sounds a little bit theoretical probably, but we have another mode as well, which is workshops. So in workshops, we have group work, and typically what happens is that groups, they have a case study, and as a group together, they sit down and they try to solve it. So there's a lot of interaction, there's a lot of exchange of experience, there's a lot of cultural exchange actually, and different perspectives for looking at problems. And of course here, when it comes to assessing your work, we're not really looking at, what is the correct answer, and therefore the objectively correct answer is this and there is nothing else. We give value to a lot of different perspectives. And whenever we see that there is an opportunity for feedback to improve someone's perspective and to widen it, then we actually give this feedback. So it is a more enhanced and more integrated learning experience. And this also translates into assessment in a different style and different culture of assessment, really. And then after that, we do have some reflection. So here we're having additional readings, more advanced topics. This is the way where participants typically connect with the problem and say, okay, I'm interested in that. I would like to learn something more. And then we can have stimulating discussion, either at the group level or individually, or some people reach out and they want to have additional material to see, to dive deeper into something. For example, behavioral theory. How do people make decisions in practice? What are the main biases? What are the strengths and the weaknesses of making decisions? And how relevant is experience? And how relevant it is in turbulent times, like what we live now, and how relevant it is in times of business as usual. So before I hand it over to the next presenter, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just give you a very small flavor of the type of issues we're going to be dealing with in this course. So, decision making, humans make decisions. So how consistent are we making decisions? Well, the answer is that we're not that consistent. And we might be confident that we decide according to our own will, but this is not always the case. Let me just give you a small example. So this is a classic example, really. So I just didn't want to deviate too much here. So what we see here is some subscription options from The Economist. So here we have three different options. We can subscribe. So these are all annual subscriptions. They last for 1 year. So this dimension is the same across different subscriptions. So we can either go for the online subscription only, or we can go for the print subscription, or we can go for both. So this was taken and it was given to participants. And if we look at the prices of each one, we might see something strange, something surprising. So if we want to subscribe to the electronic version of The Economist, we have to pay, largely $60 per year. Otherwise, if we go for the print version, we go for $125. But with $125, we can actually get both printed and the web version here, which is a little bit surprising. So when we gave some questionnaires out to people, some researchers, they identified that, well, the minority of people would actually go for the electronic subscription, and most of the people would go for the deal. So this is not so much surprising. I mean, nobody would select the middle option, right? Because it's kind of irrational here, or dominated, if you like. And, there's nothing much we can say about this here. It might seem that, people like the deals here. So like, yes, 18 out of 20 people like to take the deal, and maybe 2 people would prefer to just take something which is a little bit more economical. What is surprising, though, is what happens if we remove this middle option here. Nobody selected that. So you might say, well, why should we not actually remove it? Because it's kind of irrelevant. So what happens if we remove the middle option and we actually run the same experiment? Think about that for a minute. Would you change your decision if you had only 2 options? It's not easy, right? It's not easy to see what happens. But let's see what happens with our participants. So basically here, if we do not include the middle option, 68%, a whooping 68% goes for the online subscription, and it's only 32% that goes for the combo package here. So what is the reason for that? We eliminated an option that it seemed irrelevant, but in fact it was not relevant, because the middle option made the combo package look a lot more attractive because it had the same price. So by looking at the combo package, we were thinking that we're getting a bargain here. So a lot of people were lured into that. What is the learning of that? Well, somebody could say that, we're aware of our decisions and we know what we want. But in fact, if we frame the options in 2 different ways, we're getting radically different results. So this is one of the things, this is one of the many biases that are very systematic, and they have been demonstrated again and again. And to be very honest with you, this is a field which is really at its infancy. It's not like physics or engineering where, you know, we go back 3 centuries and nowadays we have aeroplanes and stuff. Behavioral sciences, they started in the late 50s and 60s, and therefore there's a lot of ground to cover there. But it's an exciting field, and it is very relevant when it comes to you know, judging our decisions and reflecting our judgment. So one might say, yes, okay, maybe humans have these faults in judgment. So what happens with algorithms? Do we get something similar in algorithms? Well, the answer is yes, unfortunately. By the way, I have the reference here in case you want to see more about this particular bias. So I just want to mention one case here, and then I'm going to pass it over to Nicola, just in the sake of time. So I'm just going to mention this case here with a automated software. It was an AI software that was tasked to predict the risk that a criminal defendant would reoffend. So the way that it was done is that the software would get fed, would get information for every participant, for every offender. So information like the age, the gender, the criminal history, a lot of other different questions to which the participant had to actually give answers. But note that the race of the participant was not in the input here. So it would not take into account whether the participant was black or white or of a different race. And the output is whether the risk of the participant like committing a crime again, if released, is going to be low or high. And they used the software to actually make decisions, or do we want to detain the defendant prior to trial or not? So what happened there is that the software was brilliant, but the problem is that it was actually quite biased. So if we look at how the software performed for white and for African Americans, and by the way, this is in the States, it was used from specific states to make these decisions. So if we break it down by white and African Americans, we can see that, well, the first row here shows people that the software said it's high risk that they reoffend, but they actually did not reoffend. So this is a case where the software got it wrong. And we see that it got it wrong mostly with African Americans. So the software thought that these people are high risk, they did not reoffend, and the majority of them, the African Americans, were a lot more. Actually, it was double, almost double compared to us. There's another way to get things wrong here, to label some people low risk, and yet they did reoffend. So this is the other error that the software can make here. And we see that here, this is skewed with the whites. So it thought that most of white people, a lot more white people would be low risk, but they actually did reoffend, as opposed to African American. So here we see clear evidence of bias. And this bias, of course, is not an inherent feature of the algorithm. It has to do with the data that the algorithm fed, right? So since we're going to have both modes of decision making, and we will be in a position to lead people, but also to construct and devise algorithms for automated decision making, we have to be aware of their strengths and weaknesses. And this is a great point for starting a discussion to understand better what are the strengths and in which situation one flourishes and which ones the other one does not. So just to wrap it up, when it comes to decision making, we're going to put great emphasis on, are we solving the right problem? So the ability to solve or frame the problems and solve exactly what the right problem is a major part of this course. We're going to be looking at how we measure decision quality before actually seeing the outcome of the decision. Because as we will see, decision quality and the outcome of the decision are, of course, very much related, but the link is not always as strong as we would like to be, because there is uncertainty and risk. So talking about uncertainty and risk, we're going to make ourselves more comfortable with taking risks, but we're going to be looking at taking the right risks. And when it comes to uncertainty as well, and all of this in a managerial context, we're going to see what is the value of waiting, postponing a decision until later, what is the value of this information we're going to get if an uncertainty is resolved, and finally we learn something major, or we're going to learn actually how risky a risky product is. And that's a major part of that. And then finally, we're going to be looking at biases of human and AI machines. So yes, and in which areas humans and AI decide better or worse. So I guess this pretty much sums it up. And I would like to stop here and pass it over to Nicola.
Giannis, thank you so much for sharing that. Like I said, it was when I was looking at the slides, I was actually thinking myself, okay, which one would I choose actually out of the subscription service? I would probably, maybe 15 years ago, I would have hoped my parents would have bought it and then I just would have borrowed their password for the online version. So I don't think that was quite an answer, but I think it's important that you're talking about the biases and also about managing and making decisions in uncertainty, which of course, the higher up the ladder you go, so to speak, the more often you're confronted with dealing with, making decisions in uncertain environments, which is a lot about what an MBA program, especially a senior MBA program, is about. So thank you so much for giving us a taster of what the full course will be like. This is just one little slice, if you will, of the entire thing, but I think it does give a great indication of the combination of psychology and behavioral things, as well as technology, and then tying that all back to making smart decisions as managers. So thank you so much for joining us, and you're welcome to hang around and see the next part of the segment, which, as you mentioned, is indeed Dean Nicola Klein. Nicola, so great to see you again. How are you doing today?
I am great, Brandon. It's good to be here and lovely to meet everybody virtually. So thanks for the invitation and looking forward to a chat.
Absolutely. I only wish the weather in the Netherlands was as beautiful as the background photo you have behind you there. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case, but still good to have it.
I think it changes so quickly. It's like the global economy, huh? It's up, down, one day to the next. So yeah, it'll be sunny soon.
I think that's a great segue, probably on purpose, to talk a little bit about the global experiential learning component of the program. But I think the first place to start is really, in your view, what does it mean to be global? I think that's often a question we get when we're talking about the Global Executive MBA. In your view, what does it mean to be global?
I think it's such a great question, Brandon. And I want to answer it from two perspectives. I want us to think of a helicopter pilot. And on one hand, can we take our chopper high up enough that we can actually start looking at global flows, whether those are global flows of money, whether they're global flows of risk. So if we were to turn around and say, what's going on with the pandemic? Could we actually take the chopper high up enough that we would start seeing the flows and what's happened with COVID and start actually using that to predict patterns? So I think on one hand global means that we can actually look from a worldview perspective. And of course, that's not always easy. When we take the knowledge that we have, it's often gained in context. I was really enjoying Yanis's presentation and I was thinking, well, I wonder what those results would have predicted in my home country. He mentioned that was from the US. Would that have been different if it had been conducted in China, for example? And so this ability to take up a level and start saying, what does this look like from the really big picture, the planetary perspective? There's another side to global, though. And if we stick with our helicopter metaphor, it's that ability to go into a context and be able to dive down quickly to understand how the deep structures affect things like decision making. If we are going to be looking at strategic leadership from a global perspective, we've also got to be able to acknowledge that what is going to be defined as effective strategy and effective leadership is going to be contextually dependent. And so the question for me when I think about this is, how do we in our MBA program also build the ability not only to go up in the chopper and look from a global perspective, not just a country or a European perspective, but to also be able to hone our ability to dive into a specific context and diagnose so that we can go back and make good corporate level decisions.
And I think that makes total sense, and it obviously is becoming even more challenging over the past few years. In your view, how has that changed, if at all, with what we've dealt with over the past, say, 18 months to 20 months? Has that changed, or is it still it's still the same as it was before?
So I think we've seen something fascinating, because what's happened is on one hand, we've become aware of how constrained we are in some ways by our immediate location. The Netherlands today is sitting on tenterhooks, and it may have already happened, but will we move to red? And where suddenly our ability to do things is really defined by the country. Harvard Business School was speaking last year. I was listening to the dean talk about what it suddenly meant to realize that you were located in Massachusetts. And what you could do was defined very strongly by your country or your state. So on one hand, we've actually realized in some ways the power of the nation state. In other ways, we've been able to spend a day where we can have a meeting in the morning in Tokyo, a meeting at lunchtime in Rome, and a meeting in the afternoon in San Francisco, because of what we're able to do using technology. So I think we've become far more attuned to global dynamics that are playing out, and far more aware that we're operating in a global system. And we realize, I'm constantly amazed at Australia's management of COVID. How long can you be an island? At what point do you have to recognize that globally this pandemic is real, and as much as you manage to close off the world, at some point it's going to come through into your system. So I think to answer your question, there's a little bit of both. On one hand, we have realized that we are our place of being influences the decisions that we can take, but on the other hand, we've become so much more attuned to things that cross borders.
Absolutely. And maybe turning our attention a little bit more closer to home with the program itself. Let's talk about the global experiential learning tracks, which Hans mentioned at the top of the conversation around digital transformation and entrepreneurship and venturing and so on. We've been talking about the one that you're going to be leading. So we have a faculty member who leads sort of the development, the design, and the delivery of each one of these particular tracks. And in your view, before we get into the one that you're specifically going to lead, what would you say is the sort of the main idea behind, getting out there and seeing business in context and seeing where it's happening? What are your thoughts on that?
So if we go back to the chopper metaphor, our global experiential learning tracks enable us to go in and do these deep dives. They enable us to learn at multiple levels. And the first opportunity is actually to suspend where we're from and go into a context that for some people won't be new. They may have done business there, they may have traveled there, they may even be from there. But is to go diving into that context and just try and remove our biases, our learned behaviors, to purely understand. The second piece of it for me is that opportunity to look relatively at things. How are decisions being made? What are cultural norms? What are the deep structures, the history, the geography? What is it that is shaping behavior in this context relative to other contexts where we may be doing business? And what does that mean for business? Our third piece that I think is often also very powerful is to turn around and say, what does that learning mean for what I do back home? So it's not just about how would I operate a business in this context. How does my view of risk and reward change? How does effective leadership differ in this context? But it's actually also, what could I take out of that context that I can take back home to wherever home is, and that shapes who I am as a leader.
And that's great. That actually answers a question from Stein here in the Q&A box, which was saying, will there be attention paid not only to global, but also local organizations? And I think you beautifully illustrate that. So the answer is yes. And in the case of these tracks, seeing what you can apply from one place and bringing it back to another, and bringing it to make it more relevant to where you're doing business. A common question we get around these are who designs them? I mean, do we outsource this, or is this something that we are controlling 100% within RSM? I mean, do you want to talk briefly about our approach to designing these tracks?
Yeah, I'm passionate about this question, because I think if we look at business schools and what has happened as business schools have recognized across the last couple of decades, the opportunities to travel internationally and to develop these kind of immersions, is that we're seeing significant variance in terms of how they're thought about. On one hand, some schools have made the decision to partner with organizations who have strong networks and run all the logistics. So it's a little bit like signing up for a packaged business school tour, and what you get may be pretty similar to what the next school gets. And you know that in some ways you are perhaps less experimental. This is a tried and tested route. You will have a global experience. It's not a route that I favor, because I think that the aims of every program are different, and I think Hans will be in a position also to comment on. He's already mentioned the fact that we don't want to just travel to a place with the intent of traveling there to see how business is done. We'd like to weave that into a theme. Now, that means that there's a concerted design effort to make sure that not only are we concentrating on the theme, but that we're also looking at the theme in that context. That means that we design from scratch, which is a long answer to your short question. We need to start with a profound understanding of who our audience is and what is going to be relevant to them, but at the same time then really leveraging everything that we know about that destination, the contacts that we have, to make sure that we can design a unique learning experience that makes use of who we know, what we can access, as well as what the group is needing.
And I think the good thing is RSM has a tremendous amount of experience in doing this. I mean, we've developed these sort of components to MBA programs for over 20 years. And so I think you mentioned the network, which I think is really important, but it's also the expertise that we have to deliver a flawless experience, to manage challenging situations and different things that can come up when you're on the road. Saskia, who is the programs director, will be on a little bit later to briefly talk a little bit about that. Briefly, you are overseeing kind of the last of these tracks. So it's kind of the putting it all together track, if you will. The idea is to go to South Africa. That's what we're wanting to do. And I must put this sort of caveat out there that was not a decision that was taken based on the fact that you are in fact from South Africa yourself. So the decision to go there had nothing to do with your nationality and the fact that you're dean. This is something that was conversations that were independent of that. But maybe very briefly talk about the kinds of things people will be doing. What do we envision them doing when we take them sort of off, out of the Netherlands and out of their comfort zones and going down to South Africa?
Well, I think what's really important for us to remember is that we're talking about an experience. And so for some trips, the experience is very largely linked to networks with existing business schools, which of course we have, where we can go and sit in classrooms. But to me, that doesn't take advantage of the opportunity to actually go in and really have deep engagements in a variety of different contexts with a variety of different stakeholders. Let me illustrate that perhaps and be a little more specific. If we look at conducting business in any context, it's not only dependent on how business functions in that context, it's dependent on government policy, it's dependent on civil society, it's dependent on local culture. And so the idea of being able to design a learning experience that gives us insight, and some of that we can get some insight before we travel. It's very, very important for our participants and our students that before we get on a plane, we actually know the stuff that we can know to be book smart. What we really want to do when we get there is start trying to understand those deeper structures that guide how business can operate effectively in a particular environment. So for me, for example, what does that mean from a South African perspective? It means that if we don't have an understanding around, for example, the role of government, the relationships that government has with business, and South Africa is, of course, at the moment in an absolutely fascinating space, because there are two stories. On one hand, in the mass media, there's a story of mass rioting and a country that for the last 3 days has undergone significant destruction to property. At the same time, what is absolutely fascinating is there's a story of solidarity that is emerging, where previously organizations that have not necessarily been engaging, and I'll give you a specific example, in the transport sector, we're seeing an unregulated taxi industry where taxi drivers are coming together to protect property, because there's a recognition that says economically, if we destroy this, we will not have a business. So this strong reliance between business and government and non-government organizations is a compact that actually has profound implications for the way that we operate in South Africa. So to go in and only meet with business leaders, which we will do, is not going to be sufficient to start understanding risk to understand leadership. At the same time, we cannot go to a place, I believe, without understanding something of the history, without understanding something about the journey that South Africa has gone on to embrace a far more collective way of being than it was under apartheid. So there is, yes, a journey of social justice, and that's important, and that's a relatively well-known journey, but a journey of understanding perhaps a little more about what kind of leadership models we see resulting in African humanism, and how those are actually lived in the business context. I think those kind of things will start giving us unforgettable and life-changing experiences.
No, I think it's exciting, and I think to be able to see just half of the things you're mentioning now would be super enriching. So I know that it's going to be a fantastic experience for people to go. Briefly, before you finish up, put you on the spot here. What are you most excited about for the Gimba program? I mean, this is a new program for us. A lot of work has gone into the design to make sure that it is, really a premium product and designed for senior individuals. What excites you the most about the program as you see it?
Brandon, I think there are two aspects to it, and if I don't force me to choose. But the one is that we've spent a lot of time, and this has been driven by Hans and his team, really thinking about this construct of strategic leadership. So in a lot of our MBAs, what we're thinking about is giving people a better view across the organization. But we're not really focusing on the level of how do you run organizations. So for me, I'm very excited about this level of strategic leadership, which is different. Of course, we focus on leadership and strategy in, for example, our full-time MBA, but the attention paid to that is something that's important. The second piece for me is that we really are pushing the envelope here in terms of customization. And for me, it's very hard to design learning journeys that are totally geared to the individual in very big cohorts. I mean, we talk about mass customization, and we can certainly tweak things. But the idea that this cohort has not been designed to be 100 people or 50 people or something like that, that it's designed to be smaller, and that we can really accommodate areas, developmental areas per individual, and that we can brief faculty to be focusing on those for an individual, means that the richness of this journey that we can offer, I think, is unparalleled. So I'm incredibly excited about that.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I agree, the customization part is something that I think is unique. And I think it's actually a fantastic segue. I'll bring Hans back into the discussion, give him a moment to turn his camera back on. Hello, Hans, good to see you again. Nicola, thank you so much for your remarks, Nicola, and for sharing your views on the global nature, sharing a little bit about the South African portion of that as well. So super excited for that. So thank you so much. Hans, Nicola mentioned customization, and before we kind of go down that road, maybe just to set the stage, I want to talk for a few minutes here about strategic leadership development. And this is, as you mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, one of the critical components, one of the core elements of the program that really gives it its flavor, if you will. Maybe briefly, what kind of leadership development is required for senior leaders? I mean, what is required for people who are well into their careers, and is that different than maybe what you need when you're earlier stage?
Yeah, it's a very good question, and of course we've answered that question to an important degree in designing this track. So first, it's important that you are aware of what you bring to the table as a person, right? As a leader, because a leader leads people. There's no leader without leading people or people to be led. And that means you have to be aware of all kinds of personal things that either enable you or handicap you as a leader. I'll just give you an example. I'm super Dutch, right? So I tend to be relatively direct and sometimes even blunt. And that doesn't work very well with cultures that are more focused on building relationships, right? Some things I might say or have said in the past might be relationship rupturing. Now, there's very little that I can do about that. I lived abroad for some time, but I felt even more Dutch being there. And it's also kind of the nature of the animal that I am. But I've learned although gradually and not completely to navigate, given the natural dispositions that I have. And I think that's very important for people, that they know what they bring to the table, that they know what kind of biases, what kind of ways of operating they have in the interpersonal space. Now, being senior managers, you already know quite a lot, right? So we're not going to focus that much in the strategic leadership development trajectory on those things that you might already be aware of or have trained or have experience in at this point of your career. We're focusing more on what it will take to focus on the next stage of your career. So for example, when you come in, even before you come in, we're going to ask you to fill out all kinds of questionnaires about not just your knowledge of what you already know, so we can put you in teams that are heterogeneous in the courses that we teach, and so you can help others and could be helped by others, but also with respect to your experience, with respect to your capabilities, your personality, so that we know what you bring to the table and that we compare with others, right? And I'm not going to discuss completely what we will do with that, but an important part of the first 2 days will be focused on that, right? Focusing on what you bring to the table as a person. Because if we don't account for who you are at this point in time, and if we don't account for the natural dispositions that you have and that may not be easy to change, you cannot sail against the wind, for example, but you can manipulate your sails in such a way that you can almost sail against the wind, right? And these things, we need to account for that when you come in. And we do that through self-assessment, of course, your questionnaires that you have to fill out before you come to campus to begin with, but also 360 kind of questionnaires that we ask the people that you work with, right? The people that work for you, your colleagues, and maybe even your superior, to fill out certain surveys about your personality and you as a personal leader. Now, the more important part for us is to focus on those things that will change when you take up or are about to take up, or at least have the aspiration to take up a more C-suite type of position where you have to change certain things. So, for example, instead of researching all kinds of things or making sure that things are researched, you now have to make sure that the research is done before you start consideration of important changes. You organize the strategic projects, the process. You have to make sure that you focus on the right thing. There's a lot of analytical skill and seeing things from a very high level of abstraction, defining the problems, understanding the environment in which you operate, being sensitive to all kinds of things that maybe when you're working somewhere in the organization in a functional leadership capacity, you might not be aware of. You need to be able to communicate, not just with people working for you in a different way that you have done before, because the face-to-face contacts are fewer when you are in a strategic leadership position. And you need to be able to talk to the outside world, right? You need to be able to talk to stakeholders, for example, when you make decisions that have important ramifications for the stakeholders that your license to operate might be dependent on, or that in the case of your business model, you are directly and strategically dependent on because they deliver the goodies or the services that you need to do your own thing. And modern day business models are much more stakeholder dependent than they were in the past. So these are all kinds of skills and attitudes, learning to see things from a different perspective, learning to cope with biases that you may have. For example, I'll give you another example about strategy. You may now ultimately be responsible together with the C-suite team for the development of strategy and for the implementation and the change and the evaluation of the consequences. But you also need to account for your personal risk preferences. And one of the things that we will do is we will, of course, measure that. And before you engage in the strategy course, you will have an idea of where you are comparative to others on your risk preferences and what your risk toleration, right? What you would be willing and able to do, and understand that other people are not like you, right? In that respect. And that what you bring to the table might bias very much what you see. Also, leading discussions. I mean, I work at a university for a long time already, and leading meetings is very painstaking in an academic context because everybody knows better. And it's certainly not one of my favorite things that I do, but I had never had a course in making sure that meetings are very effective, and I've done a lot to change that. And even now, being a non-executive board member, for example, you see each other not very often. You see each other maybe 8 times a year, and you still have to ask the right questions. And that means that you have to look for the right things. And these things do not come automatically. I mean, you have to really, put a lot of effort and development into making that happen in the right way, into realizing that at some point, you're on your own. There's nobody above you anymore. For example, that you cannot discuss anymore that all the management talk that you might engage in with your colleagues and stuff like that, and how to manage things and how to do things. And you may have to focus, because of non-executive directors drilling you in that direction, more on the results that you deliver, without them being very interested in how these results come about, maybe only in the strategic issues. So that means that you have to do a lot, and we will organize a lot of workshops. When you come in, we do not only know about your personal leadership things, we will also have what we would call an assessment challenge. That is, you'll be working on a case for a full day in teams, and we will be looking at you, and we will be monitoring what is happening. We will, of course, be looking at certain specific things that I will not elaborate on, because I don't want to disturb the measurement that we will do then. And that will allow you to make, and also, of course, we give you feedback. We will rate that in a system, and that will allow you to develop your personal strategic leadership development plan. And that is what we mean with personalization or customization, because we are very different people and we have very different dispositions. Although we might be at senior level, at the same senior level in organization, we come from very different backgrounds, very different disciplines. And that means we have, a group that we need to develop that is very different in their needs. And we want to focus on those needs that you, as a student participant in our program, are most, focused on, and also need to develop more compared to others. And that's not something that we can do by ourselves. You'll do that within teams over the whole course of the program. For example, you will be working on what we will call a strategic leadership project, and this might be chopped up. You need to do one project in which you demonstrate your ability and your development to deal with strategy formation, right? Strategic, developing a strategy, developing a vision, implementation, for example, but also with evaluation. Where are we? Did we make the right choices? Are we going to continue like this? And ask the right questions, right? It's not just about making money, for example. It's also, is our business model really sustainable in terms of legitimacy, right? Some businesses are very rapidly losing their legitimacy and are pushed in a direction that they may not want to go originally. Think about Shell, for example, right? Shell and the court cases and all the stakeholders that want Shell to become a much more sustainable company than it is currently. But at the same time, Shell is still a dividend share where a lot of investors invest in because they are stable in the delivery of their dividends. Now, these things are typically things that you encounter, at the highest level in your organization, and that we want to develop in a targeted way, such that we can focus a bit on the things that you need most during your engagement in the program, and we will monitor that. Not just looking at the data that we will collect, but we will also have groups in which we come together, mentoring groups led by professors, faculty that will mentor you through the program to the end of the program. And in addition to that, there will be executive coaching, right? Which is more independent. It's more on, kind of helping you to make decisions about your career, about where you are and how you further need to develop. The mentoring by faculty is more focused on actually our strategic leadership model and making sure that by the end of the program, we can tick all the boxes together with respect to your learning needs.
Hans, I think that's a great overview. And I think touching on the customization, but also the measurement piece. I think oftentimes these components and programs, they feel good, but you don't necessarily know how you're progressing. So I think having the assessments in the beginning and checking in along the way, having the coaching, having a faculty mentor, working on the leadership development plan, I think these are all things that can really point towards the measurable side of things, which I think is important, especially when you're talking about leadership development. So I'm excited for that as well. So any final comments for you on strategic leadership development before we bring our alumni into the discussion?
Maybe one more thing, and that is, any program aspires to convey knowledge, hone skills, and also develop attitudes. Right now, the knowledge is mostly discussed and treated in the core courses. Right there, you focus on the knowledge that you need at the level that you need it. Meaning, at a C-suite level, you need to be engaging and deciding collectively, even if you're not a specialist, about projects that have strong financial implications. I think the strategic leadership development track is not so much geared towards knowledge. Of course, it's based on knowledge, but the purpose is not to give you more knowledge. The purpose is more to hone certain skills that you need as a strategic leader, and to also, develop your attitudes. We're not like the brain police or the thought police. We don't want to push you in a certain direction, but it's important that if you move to a C-suite position or just below that, and you might be there already just below that. If you move, you need to look at things differently. And we enable you to hopefully to see things differently from the perspective of where you aspire to go. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing for that, and for kind of stepping in for Hannes Leroy, who is one of the faculty members you've worked a lot with to develop this. And for those in the audience today, we will be recording a side session with him where he will actually give the presentation that he wanted to give this afternoon. So don't worry, we will absolutely follow up with that. But Hans, I think you did a fantastic job sort of stepping in for him and giving a good overview, as well as some specific items from that part of the program. So thank you so much for being willing to do that.
Thank you. I certainly hope so.
Excellent. Well, Carla and Rick, you've been waiting patiently in the wings. And I'd like to sort of invite you both sort of into the conversation. Each of you graduated from our One MBA program, which was our former senior executive program. Carla, I believe for you, you were the class of 2013, if I'm not mistaken.
15.
15. Oh, I can't even read my own handwriting. You're right. It looks like a 3, but it's a 5. So that's what you get when you look off to the side when you're on camera. And Rick, you most recently, I believe, if I can read my own handwriting, this year, if I'm not mistaken. Welcome to both of you. Hello.
Thank you. Hello.
So fantastic. So I think the first question I'd like to ask you both, and obviously you have not done the GEMBA program, you have completed the One MBA program, but I think there are some kind of commonalities amongst MBA programs and such that the experience that you had with RSM, also the workload. So the questions that I'm going to be asking you are more about your experience and your thoughts on being in an MBA program. I'm not going to obviously ask you about specific program elements for this particular program, but I'll ask this question to both of you. And Carla, I'll start with you. I would be curious, why did you pick RSM? I mean, you had a lot of choices to do your MBA, but ultimately you chose RSM. What were some of the reasons why you chose RSM? And then Rick, will come over to you afterwards.
Well, to be honest, my husband chose RSM. So it's a very funny question for me to answer. My husband was in actually 2013 class. And I didn't even think about doing an MBA really, but I kind of got drawn into it when he asked me to check his assignments for English, because my English was always better than his, because I worked internationally. And actually what I read raised my interest, and I got to know RSM as an organization. I got to know the staff. I saw the developments that my husband actually went through. through all the experiences, because it was of course terribly busy. He had all of a sudden, you know, he came home from work and then went to study, but he developed in such a way that I was like, wow, you know, I want to go that road as well. So when he graduated, I started actually in the same year. So I started in 2013. Of course, I did a little bit of research whether RSM would be the optimum for me. And for sure it was, because I had always been working internationally. They had the most advanced international MBA, really. There are some other options, but they did not really appeal to me. So yeah, it was really the international reputation of RSM and the experience of my husband and his development that I saw the previous years.
It's always good to have stories behind it, because everyone's story is definitely unique about how they ended up doing the program. I'm actually a graduate from one MBA as well, and so it's I can definitely, we all have our own stories. But Rick, what about you? What caused you to choose RSM?
Well, I was not that fortunate to have that insight on the program that Carla had beforehand. No, for me, it was basically a combination of a few things, which also includes the international nature of the program, the exposure to different cultures, as well as to different nationalities within the group of RSM itself. The structure of the program, I didn't see myself attending class every 2 weeks, so I really liked the setup with the condensed periods of classes every 6 to 8 weeks. That worked. That was easy for me to combine with my job. And of course, as well, is the reputation and the name of RSM and the ranking of the program, which definitely also was a component.
So I'll stay with you for the next question. So you're in the program. What was the experience like in the classroom? I mean, what was that experience like for you? And then Carla, I'll take the same question over to you afterwards.
Yeah, that it was a while ago that I have been in class, and especially for longer periods after each other. So the beginning, it was quite tough, to be honest, to stay focused, to keep concentrated on the courses. But you get used to that rather easily. And what I particularly liked is the live discussions in our class. You really notice that there are people in there that have a lot of experience. They bring in a lot of experience from different industries, different backgrounds, and that really enriches the conversations in class. We have had numerous of sometimes heated conversations on topics that were presented, and that really enriches the content. So that was one of the important elements, and of course the in-between class interactions with your classmates, that really helps a lot, because that makes sure that you learn to know each other, as well as that you can learn from different industries and different companies as well.
Yeah, the heated discussions are usually the most fun, right? It's
yeah.
The respect. I think they're always respectful. Usually, I think.
No, for sure. But it's good to have some people that actually dare to challenge some of the content that is brought out.
Absolutely, Carla. How about you? What was the classroom experience like for you?
Well, I have to really agree with Rick that I learned a lot from peers. Of course, we got the hard knowledge through classes and professors and the stuff that we had to learn and all the readings. But learning from peers was actually a big component of the classes. When I started, it was quite out of comfort zone, really. I mean, I started in my late 40s when I started the MBA, so it had been really a while ago that I was in a classroom. What I really enjoyed was the intense cooperation with peers. It's like a roller coaster, you know. It had very high highs and also low lows, of course, because you're all together in this pressure cooker where you have to balance your personal life, your study, your family life, your work. So everybody is in this same situation, which is really, really intense. And the intensity, I must say it was challenging in the beginning, and it was the thing that I actually missed most. when the MBA was finished after graduation, what I still enjoy really is the strong network, the bonds that were made between peers during those 2 years. I still have a lot of benefits, and we still talk and we still get together, and we're still talking about study trips abroad as peers from the MBA. So after COVID, when COVID allows traveling again. So yeah, that was classroom experience for me.
I can definitely recognize that as well from my classroom experience. You know, you really form strong bonds with people, and I graduated in 2014, and you know, so still very strong. And that's actually partly how I ended up at RSM, was through that sort of network of people. Now, you mentioned, Carla, about balancing work and life and career. What was that like for you when you started? I mean, was it did it take a while to get into, or because that's another common question is, how do, this is basically you're taking on another job, right? Because it's, if you do it and you apply yourself and you really put in the time needed, it takes a fair amount of time. So how do you balance that? And then Rick, will come over to you for the same question.
For me, it was like, actually, when I started, I was in a job with a company where I already knew that I would not really stay. There was nothing wrong with the job. So, but for the first year that I did my MBA, I had a full-time job. I found that actually quite challenging because I spent about 20 hours a week on the studies, on average, I'd say. And of course, you know, you have to find your routine first. And I was in a luxury position. I understand that I was privileged. I was in a luxury position that during the second year, I could say, okay, I quit my job because I wanted to get more out of it. I did a lot of electives. I did a Women in Leadership elective. I did the South African elective. We had several electives that we could actually add to the program. And, you know, I wanted to get all of it out of the program. So the second year, I gradually started from working full-time to 3 days a week. And then I quit my job to have really the full focus on the MBA, and a home renovation project during the second year. So it is because I don't have children. I have a husband who has a very good job too. So I was in a luxury position to make my choices in order to balance it and to, you know, get the maximum out of the studies. It's not really necessary. I mean, because I had this extra time, my grades were better the second year. But it's not about grades, right? It is about the experience and finally, you know, to what you learn. So it's definitely not necessary the way I did it. But yeah, that was my first year. I worked full time. It was pretty okay, but I found that I had to, you know, compromise either my job or my studies too much. So yeah, I chose actually not to work the second year.
Rick, I see you shaking your head a little bit. So is that something you would agree with? And I'm also going to sort of, we've got about 7 minutes left. I want to be sensitive to everyone's time, including yours. So I'm also going to toss out the final question for both of you. And Rick, you can start with it perhaps. And that would be, what is one thing you wish you had known before you started the program? And then Carla will do the same thing for you.
Yeah, that is a tough one actually. And it's definitely enjoy it while it lasts, because even the 21 months that we have been doing this program, it went by so quickly. And to really indulge yourself and to be part of the experience, that requires quite a lot of room. So that's also where it touches upon the answers on the previous question, is that you need to acknowledge that it will require certain sacrifices. And it requires a certain commitment, both from your personal life as well as from your professional life. So really, truly make that commitment and also enjoy it while it lasts. That is what I would see as one of the most important lessons that I've learned along the way, and that I would like to have known up front. because that would have also maybe given me, especially in the beginning, it would have given me a little bit more ease of mind that it would be working out in the longer run as well.
Yeah, oftentimes once you get started, your head gets down and you're looking only to almost the next assignment that's due, and you can't see the forest through the trees.
Yeah, and you need to enjoy the views as well while you're traveling. So that's indeed something I would recommend aspiring students to consider.
Absolutely. Carla, final thoughts from you on that. One thing you wish you would have known before you started the program.
The effect it has on my personal development. When I started, I was really focused on the hard knowledge, learning about finance, learning about economics, learning about business. And along the way, the personal development, personal leadership development, the entire program just made me a more accomplished person. Yeah, I wish I had known, of course, I had seen it in my husband, but yeah, it's, I might have done it sooner, the program, because it really helped me advance my career, because I became a better managerial decision maker because I grew as a person, as a total. Yeah.
Yeah, I can second that as well.
It's one of those things. It's like a black box. You know there's something in there, but you don't necessarily know what it is, and you're going to change, but you don't necessarily know how. And I think it's interesting because we have two people, one who graduated relatively recently, very recently, and one who has graduated for a little while now. So it's interesting to hear that the perspectives are shared in that regard. Because I find that there are some things that when I graduated, I immediately applied and I immediately felt the change. And then there were other things that was almost like you planted a seed during the program, and it took a little while for it to grow and to prosper. So thank you so much to both of you for being willing to take time out of your afternoon to be with us and to share some of your experiences. There will be other opportunities for people to ask questions and to learn more from you. But for now, thank you so much for being here. It's really a pleasure to have you both here. Thank you very much.
It was a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Bye.
Thank you. We have about 4 minutes left, and if you've ever been to an RSM event, you know that we like to end pretty much spot on time. But I think it's important to bring in one other person into the conversation, and that would be Saskia, who is the programs director for the Gimba program. Saskia, please say hello, introduce yourself, and tell us a little bit on your thoughts on the program.
Hi, and thank you so very much, Brandon, and thank you previous speakers, and particularly the alumni who've been taking time to be here and share their thoughts with you. So my name is Saskia Treurniet, and as Brandon already mentioned, I'm the program director of the new Gimba program. So from a programmatic point of view, it's always very exciting to start with a new class, and we're immensely looking forward to that moment again. So our Gimba team, the academic director, myself, and 2 dedicated program managers will be there to guide and support the class during the intense but rewarding journey. So besides our program team, there's of course an entire RSM community that will enable and support you in all aspects of your time with us and beyond graduation even. So as program team, of course, we realize that doing an MBA next to your daily responsibilities and family life can be very demanding. So planning will indeed be very important for you, as Carla and Rick already mentioned. So our team will be communicating with you frequently and make sure that you have access to all relevant program and course information timely, so you're able to plan for dedicated time for your MBA. As we always say, we do this with you as a team, and we're there for you and work closely together. You can imagine that particularly during the last 1.5 years when we were influenced by COVID, working closely together with the class and having that very short communication lines and meetings, etc., really allows everyone to be successful towards graduation. So from our long experience as a program office and having worked with the 1MBA cohorts over the years, I would just really want to emphasize the unique experience for you to be able to engage in the diversity of peers and faculty in a relatively small MBA class setting. And the intimacy that it brings allows for very open, honest, reflective conversations. critical sometimes, but always constructive. And there's so much knowledge and experience available from within the class that you will benefit from, and of course can share with others. So consider yourself as a sparring partner in this wonderful and exciting journey with peers and faculty, kind of a transformational process. You come in with your own personality, experience, biases, and sometimes blind spots that other people will remind you about. So our program team is ready for the journey with you, and looking forward to hopefully see you soon.
Sounds good. Thank you so much. And I think it's a great point, or great thing to point out, that you and the team were responsible for delivering one MBA for quite some number of years. So the experience and the learnings and the knowledge that we have for not only delivering a great program, but also for being there as a support network, because there will be challenging moments in any program. I think Carla mentioned ups and downs and lefts and rights. And so I think having that trusted partner, that trusted guide who, can sort of say, look, we've been through this, we've worked with other students, we know the challenges and everything else, so that we can be there for you. So thank you so much for chiming in at the end. I think it's a perfect way to sort of round off the conversation today. First off, I'd like to thank all of our speakers today, from Carla, Rick, Hans, Giannis, Saskia, Nicola as well. Thank you for sharing a lot of information in a short span of time. And I know as people start to head off for the holidays, that was one of the reasons why we wanted to give as many flavors of the program as we could in as short amount of a time span as we could. So thank you again to all of our speakers, not only for presenting today, but for working very hard to develop a program that is going to be a fantastic journey, and that we are extremely excited about. And we are looking forward to inviting you and welcoming you into that journey with us as well. My name is Brandon Kirby. I'm the Director of Marketing, Sales, and Admissions here at RSM. We will be following up with each of you by sending out the recording for this session, as well as the Strategic Leadership Development recording. You can reach out to Rudsel Maduro, who is the Admissions Manager. He'll be following up with you as well. Other than that, have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you soon in the classroom. Thank you so much, and good night.